And Robin, I saw your comment in there about what you're trying to figure out is how the leaders of our organization can use stories and experiences to keep people engaged, informed, and involved. And I think this is what this is all about. This is exactly what this conversation is about. It's about harvesting that knowledge and those stories and those experiences. So I'm curious if you're willing to or can talk about this initiative and what you're discovering so far. I think would be really handy.
Well, haven't gotten that far yet, but what we're trying to do is actually make people feel comfortable actually telling stories, right? The people at the top, they're fantastic at it. You know, their TED Talk material and all of that stuff. But for your frontline managers or they don't even realize that they do it when they do it. So doing it purposefully becomes a challenge. They have an emotional block and I'm the same way, frankly. I know I tell a bad story. I jump to the, the end before I should. I forget important details that really make the story and that sort of thing. So we're having a mid-year meeting next month. And one thing I'm really trying to do is give people tricks or structure that can help them feel comfortable putting together their experiences in a format that is story-like, and then make it their own.
Mm-hmm.
And right now I've just got 1,000 ideas pumping through my brain, and none of them are very organized. And I'm hoping for a miracle, frankly, and that will help me tie it all together, make it useful for people, because I think people recognize the value, because we all have been on the other end of a story that really motivated us or helped us understand why this change is important, or gets us anxious to jump on a new initiative. But it's hard for us to see how we can use that on a day-to-day basis when I just want my folks to feel like they are valued, or I just want to have them make a change to the workflow or the process, or recognize the value of working in the office instead of from home, or whatever the situation is, and using stories to help explain the why, or that sort of thing. So as you can see, it's a jumble right now, but I'm hoping to make it into a useful discussion.
Yes, and I think it is. And one of the things that I appreciate what you're saying is the effort that it takes to find these stories and to build the stories and to structure and to host and, where they're going to live, is a new realm within our positions. So as L&D professionals, our jobs are just massively changing. And I think this is one of the areas that we need to pay more attention to. And it's beyond gathering documentation. It is getting to the heartbeat of your organization. And I think we all have a superpower for that, because our ability to connect with people is what makes us good at what we do. So then what does that look like? How do we go about it? And so for you, the struggle is real, but I also think that it's a struggle that most of us are either going to or have experienced, and we need to do this better.
Yeah. And to Erica's point, I think this is you don't want to have a 7-hour process to deliver a 2-minute story or a 30-second story, because that becomes very rightfully daunting and not valuable.
So, right. And nobody then wants to participate. And then you have challenges that are completely different. Anyone else want to build on what Robin is talking about here?
Well, I did make a comment just about the cultural differences with a global audience that I've experienced. And I have found that when it comes to storytelling, for example, my Pakistani and Japanese colleagues are not comfortable telling a story that makes anybody look bad, right? On any level, particularly their leadership. And so it can be very, very difficult to get them to describe and diagnose the problems that they're experiencing. And so I just wanted to talk. I feel like storytelling is very, very vital to what we do. I do also think we tend to talk about it academically and like lean into this like almost like script writer approach to it. And that does seem like overcomplicating it, right? So, you know, those are my thoughts. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Well, and thank you. And you're absolutely right. It's not shocking at all that a group of L&D professionals will overthink a process. That's also part of our DNA, you know, where things like storytelling, where cavemen got, you know, they all sat around the fire and drew pictures on the wall. That was not difficult. That was part of what their culture was. And that's how they communicated to the next family that moved into that cave. It's all that's the process. Very simple. And how can we do better at, you know, replicating that particular process? And I think one of the things that I actually wrote down here when Robin was speaking was sometimes we do need a guide, not like a written guidebook or documentation, but maybe someone who's really good at pulling a story out of someone, you know? So it's that, for lack of better terms, it's that story guide person. It's that person, the interviewer. It's the Jimmy Kimmel. It's the person who is there and ready to listen and listen deeply and intently with heart to get to the bottom of what is happening. And that person may not even sit on your team. It may not even be you, but it may be someone within the organization that you know, who can help you with that. Right. And then I also appreciated what Erica said. What was it here about when gathering the stories, and I'm paraphrasing here, Erica, when gathering the stories, being inclusive of all levels of the organization, because you have people who are, your boots on the ground people who feel as though their stories don't have value. And if you can get those stories for them, show that they have value, help them understand that their stories have value, rather, then that kind of snowballs into other areas of the organization, where people then want to tell you their stories because you've started this sort of an initiative.
A process that I'm a real fan of that I think then naturally can bloom into, then having these little small fingerlets kind of grow out of it, is when we're developing learning. I've learned to come to appreciate the idea that ask your SMEs about, well, what are the main pain points? Where are the points of failure when somebody is attempting to do this? And by starting off the conversation in that way, I think two things then naturally happen. And first of all, they're expressing their expertise to us, they're sharing, because a lot of people usually are very willing to tell you why things went wrong, more so than when things go well. And so obviously with us wanting to affect behavior change and move the needle from current state to future state, that's also the great way to posit that question. But then from that can also bloom, you then thinking about and then I'd like to ask this additional thing or that additional thing, or maybe they say, look, and then because this happens and this is a pain point, this is the reason why we need this, or why I'm feeling like this isn't happening the way it should. And then that, hopefully, if we're being non-judgmentally curious and being open to riffing with them, it's like, okay, so tell me more about that then. So what about this process that exists that you're feeling And this connects to something that somebody said previously, and I apologize, I don't remember who that person was. So I think maybe even us starting off with asking like where things aren't working, where there are those gaps, where are there usual points of failure, is a great way for people to then just want to talk, and then it not even feel too constricting as like an interview. And then as long as we're being open, and then it's like maybe like, well, I don't need to ask that question, I don't need to ask that question, and then we're able to be fluid in that moment as well. And then I think that gives us a great repository, because we get a lot more from them than maybe we initially thought. And then there might be different ways and different places that that information can be utilized, even though our initial ask was maybe for this particular project.
I completely agree, and I love that approach. Maureen?
Yeah, so I was looking at Robin's comment about interviews are a good vehicle for telling a story, and it just reminded me of sometimes like if you set it up like a podcast or like a radio interview,
Thank
and
you.
you
Yes.
you let the person know ahead of time what the questions are. If they're not going to see the visual, some people are more comfortable having that. They just don't want to be on camera, regardless of what's there. That's one way to kind of get some of that knowledge drawn out in those stories. And then the other is we have at our organization, it's the leaders, and they can't remember what it's called, but it's basically like a 30 seconds or 60 seconds. It's a relatively brief, but there's just like a topic that then they talk about, and they're
Right.
like they share something that's there, and it just helps to share that information or knowledge across the organization. And that's just part of our culture, which is shifting to be much more open and collaborative than it was in the past. So, and I'd also said earlier, when we are speaking with people, don't overlook the opportunity to recognize and reward them for sharing that, because that may encourage others to be more open in sharing and not hold it so close to the vest. Because and let people know how, it helps you feel valued, that there's, somebody wants to hear from you, learn from you.